This set of lecture segments is on nature, nurture, and their interaction, and I'll take a second to put them in context, which is particularly relevant in case anyone besides myself is using this film and is stepping into this one in a different order than I am. These lectures are presented towards the end of our course, and they look back. In fact, they quite explicitly start by looking back with a, as I put it, trip down memory lane to material we've already seen in the course. We've actually already seen topics related to nature, nurture, and diversity a number of times because there's a number of points in the course where we considered the question of whether there's a genetic basis. You inherited something. Something was wired in that influenced, your personality characteristics, or the development of psychopathology, or individual differences in intelligence, among other topics that we've looked at. So what we're doing here is focusing in specifically on the question of genes, environment, what's wired in, what's not, nature, nurture, and the way they interact. And in so doing, you can sort of reflect back. I won't be doing this extensively here today, but in case you're still interested in this course after it ends, you can reflect back to most of the topics in the book, and in a sense review them at this biological level of analysis through questions of nature, nurture. To preview the surprising point that happens, historically in the field of psychology, the study of nature, nurture, genes, and psychology has been kind of a one-way street story. Of course, the question, which you've seen in topics like personality and intelligence and disorders, is the question, does a person's genetic makeup influence the psychological outcome by affecting brain anatomy, brain chemistry, for example? The surprising point that's new, this is one of these areas of study that looks way different than back when I took this course. The surprising part that's new is that it's not a one-way street anymore. Much of the action in the field, and only over the past perhaps decade or so, is in the other direction with an influence of behavioral experience on genetic mechanisms, and that'll be a main theme of the rethinking the classic questions with data. In fact, there's a few more topics here that you'll see unfold that aren't quite in this kind of sketchy overview outline. So here's the trip down memory lane. Way back when the course started, we said there's a small number of recurring issues in the field of psychology, none bigger and more recurring than the question of nature and nurture. And you saw at the beginning of this course slides that look like this. The nature-nurture issue was introduced probably in the first week of the course, was the question of whether there is an inherited biological nature that came to us through some process of Darwinian natural selection that ends up shaping the organism such that you have certain psychological characteristics. And of course there is to some significant degree. Yet, if you look around the world with people having similar biological natures and doing different things, it's obviously also the case that there's a role that seems pretty darn large for nurture. Nurture meaning there's an environmental experience, if you need that shorthand, or it did at the beginning of the course. Nurture isn't like a nursery school where you learn the thing. Clearly people, if you look at what you're doing during the day, almost all the things you're doing, reading, writing, arithmetic, are things that people were not doing 50,000 years ago, and therefore they're acquired skills of a culture. The intellectual question then that we introduced at the beginning, so I'll zip through it now, is whether at birth we're essentially a blank slate who acquires information through nurturing, or whether certain mental contents meant really broadly, including emotional predispositions, are built in, wired in. And we went through at the beginning of the course two historical figures who happen to be like the major Western philosophical position people of the last, let's say, 500 years. Locke and Kant, the British and German philosophers, who variously took nurture and nature views, and we saw little cartoons of them, with Locke arguing for a nurture position and triggering a centuries-long debate in which the opponent position of Kant was that some things had to be wired in, with a compelling argument that you can't learn things from scratch. You have to have some concepts in place in order to acquire more concepts.